Hi everyone. I'm going to get started in a few minutes, so if you want to make your way down to take a seat. I'll keep chatting, don't worry, it's in a minute, so just take your time. Okay. Hello, everyone. Thank you. You're here, yes. You're awake. Thank you so much for taking the time out of your busy schedules and tackling the rain and the wind and the cold to make your Wednesday afternoon a session with me. Today I'm going to be covering data-driven customer engagement, part 3. So for those who haven't been at the previous meetups, we did cover off 2 sessions. One was an introduction to the framework, which is Engage CX. We then went into a bit about Understand, which is understanding your customer. We're up to the second part of this framework, which is Engage, how best to engage with your customers. So my name is Alan Bluwol. I'm head of customer engagement at Servian. I've been with the company for 6 years or so, and we've been working with leading Australian and New Zealand brands and delivering customer intelligence solutions, marketing automation, optimization, next best action, digital personalization. I'm incredibly passionate about data. The whole point of this framework and this meetup is to discuss concepts around data and how they influence what you do in customer engagement. The agenda for tonight, I'm going to go through a bit of housekeeping, recap the last session, just so that we get a bit of an overview of and give context to those who are fairly new. Engage CX Part 3 is the main point of this session, to go through the concepts in that part of the foundation, and then there will be pizza coming in later on tonight. So emergency exits, it's the same way you came in, so that keeps it nice and simple. You can try go out the windows, but we are 36 floors up, so don't try that. Bathrooms are on the other side of the stairwell in the middle. If you need internet access, it's serving guests, and there's a password at the back, just on the back wall there, if you need that. It is a catered event, so thank you, Servian, for funding that one. And the slide pack that I've got tonight, I may share parts of it, but perhaps not the whole thing. So if you do want to take notes, please, if you want to take photos, please do. So just a heads up on that one. A recap of the last few sessions. So why do we have this meetup group in the first place? I put this together because there was a gap I felt in material around data-driven customer engagement. We can find stuff that is data, databases, data warehousing, ETL, data integrate, whatever. We can find a lot of stuff in that space. We can find a lot of material for marketing, but nothing that actually ties the two together. And so I felt I would create this meetup group to bring people, like-minded people who want to discuss this particular topic, get your involvement in this forum, produce training materials, so the packs that I'm generating here become training material that we can present later on. That training material, hopefully, is presenting best practices around data-driven customer engagement, and it's also a forum for me to promote this framework to you guys. The Engage CX framework is something that delivers, as it says there, enterprise-wide value by focusing on identifying key opportunities at every stage of the customer journey, and it is heavily data-driven in that case. Our mission is to enable organizations to build better relationships with customers, leveraging data and analytics, and delivering those engaging experiences. I'm going to recap some of the things from introduction, just for those who weren't able to make the first few. So I talked about this concept of the product paradigm, which is the way a lot of marketing agencies and the marketing function of organizations still tends to work. The product paradigm is this: it's product and service focused. It's not customer focused. It's not what the customer really needs. It's just the pushing that particular product. And in that respect, it's also siloed and bespoke because it works within that particular product. They want to push that product regardless of anything else that happens. It's a volume game. They simply want to reach numbers and hit those KPIs, so they blast out as much as possible. It works according to a marketing schedule, not when it's relevant to the customer, just when marketing get around to doing it. And then it's often on one or just a few channels. So that's the product paradigm. It's very marketing driven. And here would be a very simple example in telco where you've got your customer screaming for more data on their plan, and the business is sending them communications about upgrade to a new phone. It's got nothing to do, right? It's not there's no alignment between the customer's needs and the business outcomes, because this is product paradigm. The customer paradigm is a little bit different. It takes both parts of the puzzle into consideration. Says, I'm looking at customers' expectations, that it's contextual, timely, relevant, consistent. Obviously, we want to engage with customers at a point in time that makes sense, while also managing and meeting business outcomes. There's no point just doing what the customer wants if it's not profitable, and so on. So growth, service, retention, and risk, we have to balance the two. So that's the intent. That's what we want to achieve through this framework, moving towards this customer paradigm. The customer paradigm is customer-centric and data-driven, because data holds a rich source of information about what your customers are doing. Right? You're not going to just get it from necessarily market research and a whole bunch of other things that happen within the marketing space, but your data tells you a lot about your customer. So it's customer-focused. It purely looks at what the customer's needs are. It's collaborated amongst the business. It's operational and ongoing, as opposed to bespoke and throwaway or one-off. It is triggered based, because if I'm observing what customers' needs are, I need to be reacting or being proactive as well at the same time. It needs to be contextual and timely. There's no point sending a message that is too late, too soon. Right? And then multi-channel. Of course, it should address all the channels that are relevant to that customer. And here would be an example of 3 things that the customer might expect. They want more data, they want reward for loyalty, they want support for technical issues. Our data is going to tell us all these things, and the business should be listening and providing a plan upgrade for more data, or access to great deals for rewards and loyalty, or sorry, we're onto it, just to show the love and that we're sorry that we have that you have experienced technical issues. So the framework has a couple of themes in it. It is sort of from a technical perspective, the themes are, it tries to create data and analytic artifacts. So the audience for this, the intent was, it would be perhaps from the bottom up. And today's session I do present on concepts from top down, from management looking down towards what are the things we're actually achieving here. But data and analytical artifacts that are structured, reusable, modular, flexible, extensible, evolutionary. There's no point building something if it doesn't meet that criteria there. If you build something that's bespoke and throwaway, that's investment out the door. You're never going to use it again, so what's the point? The intent here is, let's build it in such a way that we can reuse it. Marketing know what the objective is. They know what they want to do. It's determined the optimal action to take with a customer at a given point under the current circumstances, and they know why they want to do it, to maximize profitability of each customer. That makes sense. The challenge has been around how they actually do it. There's been many attempts, and across many engagements that I've had, they have a very simplistic approach to try and achieve these things, and it's been predominantly product driven. That is, pushing product as much as possible in the volume sense. And very rarely, although we're seeing more of it, they're moving towards a customer focused perspective. And then there are levels of capability that we're trying to achieve here. The framework is meant to move us more towards this advanced or mature level, where you might have very basic mass offers that go out to the entire database. You may be able to do some segment-based offers based on some classification that might exist in your data set. Individualized offers, you start to embracing analytics to drive who should get what, when, and why. And then next best action is looking to predict what they're likely to do next. So the levels of maturity is what this framework is trying to get it to this point. By the end of today, it will probably get us to this point. And that's why we have one more session after this in August, where we talk about next best action. So the framework itself is built on these 3 foundations: understand, engage, and optimize. Understand, which we covered in the last session, was identifying business and customer drivers. Know your customer, know what they're doing, how they're behaving, what outcomes they're actually achieving. Engage, which is what we're going to, oh no, I'm actually going to recap this. So there you go, I forgot what I was going to do. So engage is what and why. What did customers actually do? How do they behave? What outcomes did they achieve? So we can drive, bottom line, what do they need right now? That's the whole point of that part. And I'll very quickly go through some of the concepts we discussed in the last session. Customer activity is about observing everything the customer does. Not just how they responded to your marketing campaign, no. How did they use an ATM? How did they receive a support call, make a support call? Did they respond to an NPS survey? Did they make purchases, use products, raise complaints? We should be observing customer activity from every touch point that we can get our hands on, because that's going to hold such a rich set of insight into how your customers behave. This is fundamental to the framework. If you don't have this, it impacts the quality and the ability to execute on the later parts. So we introduced the concept of a customer activity store. It's one of the data artifacts, a model artifact that we've created as part of this framework, which permits you to store a chronological log of customer activity. Nothing complex about it. It's just one place that you're going to go to so that you know that's where you're going to go to get customer data. It's synonymous with digital tracking. You want to know how your website's performing, what pages they access, what sessions, what forms they submitted. You go to digital, you go to the digital tracking, and it's all there, all the activity that your customers are doing. This is the same, except it takes an enterprise lens. It's looking at touch points across your enterprise. Yeah, go for it.
Is this purely from a digital?
No, it's not. It's all these things here, which is not just digital. It's visits a store, raises a complaint. The question was, is this just digital? No. I was just using that as an analogy. It's digital. Think of digital, but for the enterprise. Every single touch point. Thank you for the question. And if anyone has any questions, please chime in. Customer activity example here would be very basically what you might find in an activity store. Essentially, I've got 3 customers and all the activity that is relevant, that was captured for each over time. So I've got things like visits the website, opens an email campaign, visits the website again, sales transaction, a whole bunch of other stuff. And it's amazing what you can actually get from this. Some of the solutions that are out there, CRM systems, MA solutions, they do give this concept of a timeline. And it's okay, but it's often lacking in that it doesn't capture all activity. Of course it can't. It's just a CRM or it's just an MA tool. And there would be work that would be necessary to go and find all the activity to pipe it into the CRM. And one day, maybe it will, and there's nothing that's stopping you from actually putting all the activity into your CRM. So there are solutions out there that try to give you a timeline, but it's not a holistic view. That's one of the challenges.
But at this point, you're just looking at to document the activities, not the associated emotions, for example?
Mm-hmm. Yes, that's right. No, just the activity. Okay. The emotion might come, for instance, if one of the activities was an NPS response and the response said it was a detractor, I've captured emotion through that one activity. I've also captured emotion by inferring that if someone's raised a complaint or a technical fault, it's also a bad experience. If they are increasing usage of a product over time, I'm inferring that they're actually enjoying the service. So from activity, we are going to deduce behavior, and you're jumping ahead, so very good. So we're going to cover all that in a moment. So from the activity store, we can identify opportunities in a variety of ways. So we can understand customer journeys. I mean, imagine if off the back of this, you implemented this framework, and now you can tell your boss, yeah, we understand customer journeys. How many bosses would be satisfied with that? I mean, all of us, right? Every boss would go, all right, I've never seen that before. Attribution modeling, something that is a bit of an advancement on, yes, I can see what happened. Now I can actually attribute activity to an outcome. And you're going to see that in a moment. And then I can also create what's called features. I won't touch on that just yet. I'll introduce it a little bit later. So when we take customer journeys as one of the benefits off the back of the activity store, we can put a lens over it, right? We're capturing detail about each of the activity. This lens would be based on channel. So the different channels and the color schemes there. So all the things in red are digital. So this guy here has got a lot of digital interactions. This guy had some at the beginning and nothing in the rest of the journey. This guy had very light touch and did a lot of stuff in retail, in store. And we can start to deduce things about these behaviors. This is perhaps someone who's not digitally savvy. This guy is, right? We can start to observe these behaviors. And we can build, of course, Sankey diagrams that describe those journeys. Why wouldn't you? That's just a gimmick, I think, but anyway, it might tell the story to a business person. From an attribution perspective, we're going one level deeper and saying, okay, I'm looking at this outcome. It was a sales transaction worth $100, right? In this journey, this person bought something at that point in time. What happened historically? That was the intent here. And now, not only do I know what happened historically, I can apply the models that we're going to borrow from the digital space to say, distribute it in this distribution, right? It's decaying over time. It's saying submitted a contact form, did contribute to this outcome, but only 2% of the entire journey, okay? Whereas the thing that happened just prior to the transaction, I'm giving it a greater weighting. The framework permits you to do this. It doesn't dictate which of the models you want to use. You use whichever model your business agrees to use. And that's a fun argument to have, because but the minute you start putting numbers against channels and business units, a lot of arguments begin to unfold to which model you're actually going to use. Okay, so it's obvious that through a better understanding of customer activity and business outcomes, we can identify opportunities. And this bit, the opportunities bit, does require a little bit of creativity, interpreting what customers are doing and what the outcomes they're achieving to create opportunities to engage. So that begs the question, okay, we can engage now. What are we engaging about?
Just one question.
Yeah, go for it.
Customer A, is that a representative persona of a segment?
No, it's a one customer. It's a single customer.
So how many customers you need to build the database for
I don't think it matters. I mean, I have a client who's going to do it with 3,000, which is for me is like, what? That's not a lot. Another client has 2 million. Another client has 7 million. So it doesn't matter. The framework can apply either way. I mean, doing it against 3,000, is there really value in other ways to solve your problems? Yes, probably. 3,000 is not justification for perhaps a framework as sophisticated as this one. But you talk to any tier one who has millions of customers, this starts to make more sense. And I'll touch on that point actually when I get to value of customer, because I'll get to that in a moment. So what are we engaging with customers about? Well, I don't want to say campaigns. I sort of want to fix the terminology as part of this framework. It's not that we're targeting them with campaigns, we're targeting them with propositions. So I'm going to go through the definitions as I see them. A proposition here is a course of action. It's the thing that you are offering, and that's how I want it to be described going forward. So it's a product, a service, an offer, a bundle, it's information. Whereas a campaign is the set of actions that drives that proposition. So if I had the iPhone upgrade campaign, I'm talking about the thing that the customer is actually going to get is an iPhone. That's where it ends. The upgrade campaign are the actions taken by marketing to get them the iPhone, right? So let's use that as the terminology that resonates throughout the rest of the presentation. So when we campaign a proposition, we start with a single proposition. We capture an audience for that proposition. You must all be familiar with these concepts. It's typically driven by eligibility criteria and perhaps coupled with some standard exclusions, like cannot be contacted because they're dead was one of them that I saw, or because they're not the right age, or because they've got unsubscribed, or whatever it may be. And then we define a treatment, which is grouping audiences to target or not. So if we have target and control with different creatives and incentives on one or more channels. For those who are in marketing, this is what you do, right? This is what you come up with. And so you go, is this enough? Okay, is it enough? If we took the iPhone upgrade, we go eligibility is active and in the last 2 months of a 12 or 24-month contract, and the treatment is give them an email, free 10 gigs per month for the first 3 months on a recontract. The proposition, the eligibility criteria, the treatment, this is the campaign that drives that proposition. And you go, okay, I'll let you take a photo. Before, quick, okay, cool. Campaigning a proposition, okay, what are the pros and cons? Well, yeah, it's data-driven. Arguably, this is data-driven, right? I'm using data to define eligibility and then segmenting some way to say it's target or control. So yeah, it's data. And it's fairly straightforward. And it can be easily automated. So to your point, can I grab your name? Faz. Yeah. Faz, to your point, in terms of level of maturity, a small organization might be okay with just doing that. It's still data-driven. We've helped them get there. It doesn't have what I'm about to go through with cons. It's not smart. There aren't smarts built into it. It's just based on basic filter criteria. It's siloed. It only considers the one proposition. It's not considering that there are other propositions available for the same customer. Yeah.
Just curious, do you have any clients that are like social enterprises that you could say this framework can be also applied to social enterprises?
Not sure. I'm not sure I can. I don't know.
Like
So I don't know. I actually don't know how to answer that question. But I'll come back to that one. I'll see you afterwards. So whether it applies to social enterprises or not. A question I commonly get is whether this applies to B2B, B2C, right? B2C is a common distinction. I'm doing one now which is B2B, so it can apply, right? It's just about obtaining the right data to drive your campaigns or drive your propositions. And it follows the product paradigm. So doing campaigning this way, this simple approach, it just focuses on the product. It doesn't actually care about the customer. Okay, yes. Good animation for it, thank you. So let's get to the second foundation then, engage. And engage here is about executing engaging experiences. Let's break that down a bit further. Who, how, when, and where. Okay, who should we engage with? How should we engage? When is the best time to engage? And where? What channel is best to engage? And a lot of this is being driven by the capability that it's enabling through the framework, which is to automate analytics that describes customer behavior. It's the ability to execute personalization in a proactive and data-driven way. Right? Okay, so in order to do this effectively, obviously we need deeper insights by tapping into our data to obtain customer details, demographic information, the value of that customer, behaviors of that customer, and we're going to leverage what we just developed in the understand part of our foundation, all the activities that we've captured for customer. So this is building up capability. We started with customer activity store, let's move on to the next bit. So we need a systematic way to continuously identify opportunities, and we're doing that by leveraging data analytics, artificial intelligence, and machine learning. We're going to go into that now. Where do we start? Do we have a lot of data scientists in the room? Raise your hand. 1, 2, sort of, 4.5. Okay, so where do we start? Feature engineering. For those who don't know, I'm about to go into it anyway, but feature engineering is, if I had a huge data set, where do I start? I'm going to start pulling out features. So what is a feature? A feature here is an individual measurable property of a phenomenon being observed. Okay, great. And in pattern recognition, classification, and regression. What does that actually mean? It's pulling out these signals. Okay? When I build a feature, I'm pulling out a pattern so I can identify things like, is the customer profitable? Are they likely to churn or purchase something? Do they love the brand? Are they loyal? Do they use the product well? And so on. And then in pattern recognition, other things that we might detect through the features that we create are, is it an active customer? Are they declining usage of that product? Are they detracting? Are they new? Are they uncontactable, unresponsive? Are they experiencing hardship? And so many other things that we can detect through an analysis against all the activities that we've just captured. So really it comes down to this. It's identifying opportunity. We take our customer, we identify their state. They are a user of the product. And if they're increasing that usage, which we can detect through their activity, I want to retain those, obviously. We can start defining tactics for each of the behaviors that we're observing. If they're stable in their usage of the product, I want to increase or maintain that at the very least. If they're decreasing, somehow I want to stop decrease. So you can start to see that, obviously by understanding customer behaviors, we define tactics for each. And you're going to see a little bit of that later on as well as we dive into how we actually do this bit here. So features equal opportunity is what it comes down to. Let's look at the customer activity store and behavioral features. So this is very wordy, but essentially it's saying that this store becomes a very important source for behavioral data. You're not going to go and find it from the source systems direct. They're scattered. They're all over the place. The customer activity store brought it together, so that's where you're going to go to identify behavior. And it's one of the challenges here is that it's very granular, as you can see, right? It's almost transactional in nature, and you go, that would be very difficult and computationally expensive to process and to pull out some insight. So what features do, and I think this is a nice definition of it, is reduce this granular data set, which is somewhat unmanageable, into what are called explanatory variables. They're starting to define a pattern that explains some phenomenon, some outcome. They're using, they're not using, they're declining, and so on. So as an example, and I think I covered this in the previous session, if we looked at two completely different customers and their behaviors, the question is, are they the same? Can we answer this question? Immediately it looks like they've got completely different behaviors or activity against them. But if I ask the same question from a specific perspective, like the digital one, is this the same customer from a visits website perspective? Actually, if I call them out, they do start to look the same. If I pull out two features that say the average frequency against the two journeys is it's 7 days between site visits and it was two site visits in the last 10 days, both are identical, and we can start to identify these patterns.
But all these patterns are being built up or being understood from the touch points that this company has or the company we are working with?
Whatever they can touch, whatever they can get access to.
What are being influenced by the substitutes or the alternate?
You'd have to acquire all that. You'd have to acquire it externally, absolutely. There are things that will influence your customer's behavior. It'll come from the market, from the environment in which they live or work or operate. You're going to have to obtain that and bring it into this model. That's a challenge because it may be anonymized, maybe it's aggregated to a level that doesn't join. Absolutely, there are challenges in there. This does take a more internal view of the world. What are customers doing right now with our products? arguably that only represents 1% of what the customer does. You're spot on. So if we take another activity, doesn't matter what it is, from our activity store, and we compute 2 features, this is what it might look like across the different journeys. And although these look completely different, you do this over thousands or millions of customers, thousands or millions of customers, you're going to start to recognize patterns. That's if we tried to do it manually, like ourselves try and interpret all of this. Obviously, we'll never do that. We'll ask the machine to do it for us. We'll get to ML and all that in a second. So if we look at the anatomy of a feature that we're going to pull from our activity store, we start with the activity. This is why we need the activity store in the first place. And then through these, we condense the raw data set into something more meaningful. So I just used RFM as a very basic example. If I looked at frequency of a particular activity, the recency, the monetary value of each, I can aggregate it through different perspectives, whether those are temporal or classified in some way. I can observe something. As an example, that was probably a very complex explanation there, but as an example, number of emails delivered in the last day is an example of a feature. I might use this to start answering specific questions like, am I over contacting this customer on email? Well, wouldn't I want to know that? So the feature itself is made up of some sort of aggregation, count, number. Emails delivered is the activity that I'm interested in, its channel and its state, and the temporal perspective here is in the last day, right? And I think you might be able to see that it's very easy to build probably thousands of features off the back of all your activity. Here are just, how many I've got up there, 7. Number of emails in the last day, number of mandatory emails in the last month, days since the last email delivered, average day between emails, right? If we broke that down even further by different channels, by different temporal perspectives, continuous or discrete, different states of activity, different aggregations, we can very easily come up with thousands and thousands of features. And you're probably thinking, but wasn't the problem that we had very granular data? Now you're saying that we can go and generate thousands of features off the back of it. And it probably leads to chaos. Now you have features instead of just granular data sets. Sure. And what are all the interrelationships between all of these features and how do they actually answer a question? You're right. We'll get to that in a moment. So it may lead to chaos for us simple human beings who will never be able to understand the relationships between all of these, but that's why we have AI and ML. You'll see that in a moment. So why have all of these features? Back to our example campaign of the iPhone X upgrade and its eligibility and treatment. To make this more sophisticated, is that what I want to say just yet? Okay, we want to ask deeper questions around this proposition. It's not just that they're eligible, or that, it's not just that they're eligible. Will the customer be receptive to this proposition? Are they interested in an iPhone X? Is the proposition even performing? Is it even worth selling iPhone X's? Is the customer interested in upgrading or renewing at this point in time? Is the customer in flight with another program that would be impacted by trying to proposition this one? Is email the most appropriate channel? I'll pick on that one in a sec. And then is there a more effective treatment? So you sort of go, I could have run a campaign and it would have been very simplistic. But by answering these questions, we get a much broader understanding of what the customer's needs actually are and whether or not this is the right proposition at this point in time. And obviously we need a way to answer these questions systematically, operationally, ongoing. It can't just be one-off, bespoke. Go ask your data scientist whether this person is interested in upgrading. Organizations do that. They will commission a piece of work to go and answer just this question. But that's just one question. And it's going to be made up of all the features that we may have computed, and that's bespoke and itself throwaway, because it'll only be relevant for that one campaign. But as if answering this question or any of the ones that I've presented here are not relevant across all the campaigns we may want to run. Or even, let's park the marketing conversation for a little bit. What about operational insights and how this will drive other things internally? Whether or not I should change the propositions that I'm putting forward, whether or not I should stop other campaigns that are in flight, whether I should look for different ways in which I can engage. These are all operational questions that you ask internally. So if we break it down a little bit further, I'm going to pick on one of those, which was, is email the most appropriate channel for a customer right now? Because one of my customers did ask, are we over-targeting our customers on email? And no one knew how to really answer that question. So is email appropriate right now? Would be one thing. So a simple approach would be, we have an email, it's valid, and we have consent. Is that enough? Well, yeah, it's data-driven, but it's pretty basic. It doesn't really tell us anything about the customer. It means, is email the appropriate channel right now? Well, if we have all these things, yeah. No. What about the rest of the stuff that we want to know about customer? So we really need to introduce multi-dimensional analysis here, which is nothing new. It's talking about a data analysis process that involves looking at a problem from several dimensions or several aspects. It's taking all the raw data, all the raw activity that we know about customer, condensing it into features, looking at how they interrelate, and all the permutations of all those relationships to then drive deeper insight. So a better approach would have been, is email appropriate for a channel right now? We have a number of features that we can call upon. We can say, okay, we had those first three, that's fine, but then what is the customer's engagement score? How many did we send for this type of proposition in the last day? What was the time since the last email, right? We have all of these features, and we'll have a heap of them, and they're reusable as well, because I've stored them in what I'm going to present in about a second. So the depth of this analysis is now achieved by observing the interrelationships between all of these features. We can also gain deeper insight through the same features and answering a whole bunch of other questions, right? You get the theme that I'm putting forward here is that we don't want to just create something that's bespoke and throw away, that just answers the one question. If you're going to invest the time to create this, put it somewhere so that you can answer lots of different questions. And not just answer them as a one-off piece of work, you can even answer these in an automated and operational way. So do we compute them on demand just when we need them, or do we, and where do we store all the features that we're going to create? So here comes the foundational asset, data artifact, that is another core data artifact of this framework, which is called the Analytic Feature Store. How many people have heard of the Analytics Feature Store? You may have heard of it as the CAR, Customer Analytic Record. Anyone? Yeah, Marcus, put your hand down. Servian. So Analytics Feature Store is a data store containing features, the ones that we want to create and capture, about customer state and behavior engineered to, okay, I'm just reading it from the side, but it's modular in nature, it should be reusable, dynamic, flexible, it should allow us to automate machine learning and deeper insight, it's historicized. When I say modular, what I mean by that is features will be observed at different rates across different systems, and you might need to compute them using different languages. So by being modular, we can achieve this flexibility, right? I want to compute something once a day, once an hour, once a month. It doesn't matter. It shouldn't be tied to, we're limited to just processing everything once a day. No, the framework should be flexible enough to permit you to do it in batch, near real time, scheduled, triggered, and using a variety of programming languages to create the features about our customers. And the reason we're talking about this is because some features will be relevant immediately and decay very quickly over time. Others don't change that often, and so we need that flexibility. The feature store itself as a data model is very, very simple. It's called the EAVT model. It stands for Entity Attribute Value Timestamp. The entity is the thing for which you're computing a feature, a customer, an organization. The attribute would be the name, the label that you give that feature. It doesn't matter what it is. The value is the value of that feature, and the timestamp, that was the time that it was created. The model, what it does is standardize feature data and represents them in a key value pair, meaning it's infinitely extensible. I guess, look, I've represented it this way. It's not really, if I showed you the physical data model, it's obviously not going to look like that. It's going to look a little bit more normalized. So for instance, for attributes, you might have an attribute mastered metadata store off the back of it. So don't take this as gospel and go and build something that has four fields in it. It's not going to work. This was just to give you an idea. So features, the Analytics Store benefits is that features can be added indefinitely. Nothing is stopping you from putting in brand new features. Putting in brand new features. It can be maintained for any entity, because entity is just an identifier for the thing that you've computed a feature. Like I said, a customer, an organization. It can be added at any time, because that's why we have our timestamp. And at any rate, I can introduce features at any rate into this model. It can be added without altering the schema. Because it's a key value pair, if I went and created a brand new feature like feature 4, which didn't exist previously, I've just added a new feature, but I didn't have to change anything. I'm simply inserting into this table. I can also perform updates. So, sorry about the color scheme, it's not really coming up that well, but if I had entity 1 with features 1, 2, and 3, value 100 at time 1, I've just gone and changed feature 1 and feature 3 from value 100 to 200 at time 2. Okay, that's all I'm saying. In this one model, I've just gone and performed an update, but I didn't change anything. I didn't actually do a physical update. Physical updates, from a technical perspective, are very slow. You don't want to do them. And this is going to be quite large, especially if we're computing perhaps billions of features at one point. So we have this historical view of what we computed at time 1 and time 2 for the same feature. And we also have new features being introduced. And the value column, you're sort of arguing, oh, is it always going to be numeric? Could it be string? That's why we have the metadata store about what this attribute represents. If this was numerical, the attribute would say it's a numerical feature, so go and interpret this as a number. But it could be interpreted as Boolean, date, whatever. You define it however you want. It's not enough just to represent it as this model, because this is not overly useful for analytics and automating the AI and ML stuff. So what we do is we take that table and we create a dynamic view that automatically pivots it into something a lot more usable. And this is what you know as the CAR, the customer analytic record. What it is one row per entity. So the relationship between these features is that it belongs to entity 1, and these are the values for that feature, right? So what this allows us to do is simplify ingestion into AI/ML, and I'm going to show you that in a sec. And it's the latest view. So, but that depends how you define this view. Obviously, I want to know the latest about my customer. That's the one I'm going to act upon. If I want to look at history, I've always got it here. So that's how the model works.
How useful it is, right, at this stage to run or rerun the understand phase? And would that be of any use at this stage? And what kind of probes are there? So digital probes I can understand, but the physical probes that you use to understand the behavior at physical touch points, how in this model you are getting the data from those sources?
That was addressed. So the question was, how do I get signals or activity from systems that are not online, not readily available, like a kiosk, an ATM, walks into store? That'll come at the rate that it's made available in the organization. It depends on the maturity of that organization. If for instance, I pick a big tier 1 bank, from their ATMs, they've got an immediate feed in real-time form straight into a queue that I can then feed into my activity store. So activity store was a concept we talked about last time, and at different rates we can feed that activity store. If your organization is not mature and has data being created at different touch points, but it's not accessible, or it has to process in batch, yeah, you have to wait until, obviously you have to wait until that data is available. There's no other way. And the challenge there, of course, is that it may have decayed in value. The value of that activity, the longer you wait for it to come into your system. So the intent here is, as much as possible, try and get it in there as quickly, quickly, so that you can actually compute your features and build a view of your customer that is most up to date, right? The less up to date it is, the less value you're going to get. It's not that you're not going to achieve any value, but the value deteriorates the longer you wait for that data. So that's all. That's one of the conditions. See, I don't put any constraints on it needs to be there in 1 second, because it doesn't make sense. I can't propose that to a client if they physically cannot do that. So I have to propose the options of what I just explained. So now what? So we have all this, the analytic feature store. We have it in a view that is pivoted, 1 row per entity. Now what? How do you make use of these features? We said we had chaos in the way that we just define features and we don't understand their relationships. So that's why we bring in AI and ML into the picture. We're not going to understand it, but I can build a model that tries to predict, tries to segment, tries to describe, right? So using features would be, if this was my feature store, for every party I had all the features computed, how easy would it be to just select the ones I needed to pipe it into a churn propensity model? It's there, it's already done for me. And those same features I can use to also do behavioral segmentation. This is where the value lies. Someone is going to go and do this in a non-operational way. They'll still get the same outcome, but it's, like I said before, it's throwaway. They will do it, they'll get a score, and that's the end of it. This one at least proposes a way that I'm storing these persisted and maintained over time, that I can continuously pipe into my models, that I will retrain if they sort of decay themselves in value. And they actually themselves produce new features. And we can start to have feature dependency happening. So we'll see that as well. So a feature store, we have this feature. It's binary in nature. It's true, false, or Boolean. Is email the most appropriate channel from before? For one customer, I've gone and computed all these features and they exist in the feature store. What we want to do is do feature selection through correlation, what actually aligns to answering this question, then pipe it into a model, maybe a binary classification model makes sense in this case, that will predict true or false, or give me some sort of score that I can then classify as true or false. And that's the intent of everything that we're trying to achieve here. So if I can start answering these questions, I have deeper insight into what my customers are doing, what they might want, how they might behave, and then I can start defining the right strategies. And as I mentioned before, this true or false and this label becomes a new feature that I can use for subsequent models. So it's forever evolving and maturing. I didn't lose anything in this entire process. So AI and ML itself, in its contribution to this whole thing, is that it's what did I write there? Simple maintenance of features that can easily be ingested. Okay, whatever. So the feature store permits us to pipe it into AI/ML, so we can do descriptive classification, prediction, prescription. Those are, I want to classify my customers in terms of maybe these segments, types of segments, behavior, demographic, value. Predictive, I want to know the responsiveness to a communication, receptiveness to a proposition, how a creative resonates with that particular demographic. And then prescriptive, which we're going to cover in part 4, not tonight, is that next best action. It's about taking all this and ranking it, prioritizing it, and arbitrating it when there are more than one proposition. But that's a bit more advanced. We'll cover it later. So a quick overview of the whole thing, how it stitches together from the two pillars I just discussed, and sort of answers your question first. So source systems is where all the data of our organization lies. Maybe you have a warehouse, that's fine. Some sort of data integration may have brought it together. If not, that's somewhat important. If without that, trying to source it from the systems themselves, possible, bit of a hurdle, a bottleneck. Like ideally, you have brought it all together. Sorry, it's a warehouse. Yeah, this is the concept of a data warehouse. We call it hub because data warehouse got a bad rep. So we just renamed it. It was easy. So activity processing would be looking at all the data. Now we have a consistent way that we can interrogate all our source systems. We bring it into the activity store. Why wouldn't we? And from the activity store, we compute our features in a variety of ways and store it in the analytics store. Not rocket science yet. We may also have a view because features may not purely be behavioral. They may be other things about customer. So sure, you'll have a link back to the original data hub, a full view of the world in order to create your features. Pizzas are here, yes. AI/ML, I'm going to get through this as quickly as possible. No. AI/ML, I'm starving, I didn't have lunch today. So AI/ML will then allow us to take the features, pipe them through, and then you've got that feedback loop happening of features creating features and more insight being created off the back of it. Then something needs to tie all of this together so that we have a view of the world from the marketing perspective. Right? So some sort of marketing data processing that takes customer data as it stands, all the behaviors that we know about them, the scores and models that tell us what segment they belong to and how likely they are to respond to a particular proposition. We bring it together and we represent our customer in a marketing database. A lot of organizations get this wrong. I mean, they may not even have this. They go straight from here to here and they get this wrong. They don't represent party, the customer, in the right way for marketing. It's one of the things that when I do advisory, I'm doing one now for a power company up in Brisbane, and I spend a lot of time trying to educate them around why it's so important that within a database, I have the flexibility to represent whatever I want. CRM failed to represent customer. MA represents customer from a marketing perspective. Something has to bring that together, stitch it up in a way that truly represents your customer. And that's the party model. I'm not going to talk about the party model here, or if I thought about it, I probably would have put it in. And then we obviously want to link that back to a source system. You'll notice I've talked about source system. Actually, that's just one of them is MA itself. It is a source of data. This tells me how customers have responded to a campaign, right? Whether they clicked, whether they opened, how long they spent online, right? How long they spent on a landing page, the data they may have entered into a form, right? All of this is then coming back into here and driving the whole engine. So that's it.
Use that, turn it back into the operational side of the business as well.
Absolutely.
So that's the whole, so it ties it, so they can do all the prescriptive if they want to.
Yep.
But at least predictive.
One of the things I'm doing now is when I define the customer properly in the marketing database, for that client, they have the CRM that doesn't represent customer the way that they want. It just represents it at an account level or from a billing perspective, so not a true customer. The customer has all these relationships in the way that it's structured. It has a parent, it has a child, it has contacts, it has all this stuff. Whatever I do here can inform these source systems, right? Just because CRM was designed poorly up front doesn't mean I shouldn't be able to gain access to the data and a view of the world the way I want. But I need this in order to do that. And all of this stuff that hangs off the back of it allows me to drive insights within this whole process. So yeah, it's a common theme in all of my clients is, oh, we don't know who customer is. I'm like, wow, that's like, yeah, anyway. It's not frustrating, it's great for me because that's what I do. Anyway, so who gets what? Ultimately, this whole architecture is to drive answering this question. If I had one customer and I had propositions, what are they going to get? It's as simple as what bucket are they going to fall into? They don't necessarily have to fall into one of these. It could be that they fall into many. It depends on their behavior and what the proposition actually is. So we've addressed data and analytics. So what about engagement strategy? I said I was going to talk from the bottom up technology. Now I'm going to talk from the top down. The business want a strategy. So customer engagement strategy is roughly these steps. And amazingly, you have organizations that are doing this. Of course they are, because they have to. They have to market. They haven't done any of this other stuff. Or if they haven't done it in a data-driven way. You know, they might have done this whole bit here, customer analysis was really market research to 20,000 of the 5 million customers they had. It's like, how representative is that? Whereas if they leverage their data, and I'm not going to talk about this again, the customer features and analysis, because someone might throw a chair at me. But customer analysis is that data-driven approach that prepares our data so that we can do this next bit, profiling. So I'm going to talk about that before I talk about the strategic actions that happen off the back of it. Customer profiling is this. It's taking all the insights that we've just identified about our customers, classified them in some way, valued, behavior, and demographic, so that they become manageable audience segments. Obviously, within and amongst these, there's a lot more deeper insight, but it's not manageable if I had 1 million segments, right? That almost becomes segment of one, which is utopia. We can talk about that in part 4. Today, and the maturity that the level of maturity I'm going to take this conversation to is, I want to, at some point, break it up into labels that define audiences, so that for each of these labels, I define a strategy. I'm going to talk to teens who are low value and no tomorrow, you know, they just spend their money like crazy. A different way I talk about retirees who are super savers of high value, right? I can immediately, using just these segments, start to define audiences that I want to target in a particular way. So that then leads to the strategies that we want to develop against each. Everyone followed, right? That we're talking about using data, the generation of features to analyze their behaviors, to create profiles, to then define the strategy, not to just randomly define a strategy, which is what many do. They go and define a strategy based on what? I don't know, research or finger in the air, rule of thumb, I don't know. But what's that? Instinct, yes, yeah, definitely. Instinct and experience and intuition and a whole bunch of other stuff. If they started here and just did this, that's immature. It really needs all of this if you want to be truly data-driven. Okay. So when we talk about customer strategies, the strategies take a holistic view of customer. It's not narrow. It is really taking all the things we know about customer, all that insight to inform what the strategies are. And I'm going to jump into each one of these. So find the profits. They are our value segments. Find the profits. What's the point? And this is a purely fiscal, from a pure fiscal perspective. What's the point of doing business if they're not profitable? It doesn't make sense. Right? Unless they're a charity, if I use that term, but the whole point is that they're sustainable and profitable. Otherwise, there's no point doing business with them. And this segmentation permits us to find those customers that are worth engaging with. And then there's this 80-20 rule, which I sort of wanted to touch on. Faz was asking this a little bit earlier, which was if I didn't have a big customer base. 80-20 rule, everyone knows what that is. 80% of profits, in this context, 80% of profits is driven by 20% of your customer base. Fine. Arguably, you go, if I did marketing automation, am I really going to target my most valuable customers with an automated campaign? Probably not. You're going to have relationship managers, account managers, BDMs, someone who's going to keep in contact, right? These guys represent the majority of your profit. Then that leaves the other 80% who, they still drive the business, but they only drive the 20% of your profit. And you go, that's where you're going to automate. That's where you sort of go, I've got to keep costs down. There's no way I'm going to relationship manage all these people. So I'm going to build marketing automation in a way that's just using data analytics to understand their behaviors, to target them with the most appropriate message. Maybe I turn them into highly profitable customers. So that was find the profits value segmentation. What to offer is behavioral segmentation. Really, it's breaking those audiences into manageable groups, defining what the customer needs. So a super saver, I can define a strategy around that. That customer, from a superannuation perspective, from a bank's perspective, that's where this is borrowed, I need to give them the highest yielding interest account because that's what they're going to want. The no tomorrow wants access to their money as quickly as possible. That's a different set of propositions, different set of products, right? You can see that based on just behaviors, I can start to define strategies for engagement. And then how to offer it is demographic segmentation, really. And I can do this independent of a proposition because what I'm saying is I'm building models that define, based on demographics and behaviors, features that help me decide how I'm going to treat a customer. And will it resonate with that customer? Treatment here refers to the creative, the copy, the incentives. Bathrooms are just on the, sorry to draw attention to you. Better than attention to myself. So treatments refer to the creatives and copy that incentivizes, and the incentives that are presented to customer. And resonates refers to these things. Does it evoke image? You talked about emotion here. Does the treatment resonate? Does it evoke images, memories, emotions that influence or affect their attitude in some way positively to get them to act on that proposition? So once again, and I have it written there, superannuation is I'm going to talk to teens very differently to retirees. A teen doesn't give a crap about their superannuation. They see it as a burden. 9.5% of my salary is going into super. I'm not going to touch it for 45 years. Whereas a retiree is constantly going, do I have enough? Is my balance there? How can I manage the way that I'm paying myself? Is it going to last until I eventually move on?
You separated out the behaviours first in order to then target the message based on their behaviours. So even though they were a different demographic, you then retarget it again. So you've got 4 propositions, so for instance, 4 propositions, but then the way you speak to them, you might have those 4 propositions all to the active greys, but you can speak to them differently.
Absolutely.
Is that how I understood?
So the intent was I can have 4 different propositions. If I'm talking to a teen, they'll have the same flavour in the way that they look, they feel, the tone of the message. It's a playful message in the way I speak to a teen. Whereas a retiree or an active grey, I don't even know where I got that, but it's like talk to them in a serious tone, show images of enjoying your retirement kind of thing. It doesn't matter what the proposition is. This talks to the themes of the way that I'm presenting those propositions. This perhaps ties to what you were saying, which is now when I work out who to offer it to, it's a matrix that brings together all our segments, really all the permutations in one massive matrix. And at this point in time, I sort of go, well, which ones are the ones that I want to target? Do I really want to target teens who are religious savers? Maybe, maybe not. Depends. It depends on what the strategy of the organization is. So by bringing all of these things together into a matrix, I now define who I'm going to target. And there may be specific reasons why you wouldn't target certain segments. It's because they're not profitable. That's an obvious one. They're detractors beyond repair. There's nothing you can do to save them and they're damaging your brand, so let them move on. Like you can say goodbye to a customer. Or we just don't have propositions yet. We've identified a niche opportunity to target them with something, but we haven't defined what that something is. Right? So actionable segments really not only tell us who to target, they even tell us or identify for us what are new opportunities that we hadn't considered. When to offer a proposition is proposition propensity analysis. Up until this point, it was segmentation, so describing what happened. Now I'm trying to predict what they're likely to do. So proposition propensity analysis is the likelihood that a customer would be receptive to the proposition. It will be defined by eligibility rules, of course, because just because I've got a proposition, someone may not be eligible for it. Fine, that's defined by the rules, but it's guided by behavior, right? So if they were eligible, do their behaviors align to they're likely to want this product? They're approaching the end of their contract. They are an Apple product, an Apple owner. They actually have multiple Apple products, so I know that they love the Apple brand. So perhaps, in a model that I define, it would tell me a score whether or not they would be very receptive to iPhone X versus an Android, right, versus Pixel 2 or something else. So that's what we're trying to do with when to offer it. Welcome back. And channel propensity is where to offer it, the last part of the puzzle. So it's once again a propensity analysis that says, I've got a proposition, I know who my customers are and the ones I want to action. How am I going to actually push this forward, or where am I going to push it forward? And there are a million channels on which it can happen. So the likelihood a customer would be responsive to a particular channel, which again is defined by contact eligibility rules, right? If they've got consent and a whole bunch of other things, sure. And it's guided by response history. If they responded to email positively previously, they're likely to respond again, for example. If they never opened an email, why keep trying? Maybe it's an old email they don't even look at. Maybe they've moved company and the domain is like woolworths.com. They've moved to Coles, or there'll be a bunch of reasons why. But it's guided by response history that tells us whether or not there will be where to offer it to. How can we actually offer it? Yeah, go for it.
So we have the channel propensity analysis here, and perhaps we have already done some kind of attribution which is a part of the end. How would you tie them up together, or how would you distinguish between the two?
Sorry, I got distracted by the guys leaving, and I missed part of your question. Could you ask it again? Sorry about that.
So we're also doing, let's say we are doing attribution analysis where we have chosen our set of model and we have identified which channel in the historical data attributed to how many sales or whatever your outcome is. When we have something like a channel propensity analysis, how do we tie those two together? Or how would you distinguish between them? Or
You mean, so how does the model tell us between channels?
Yeah.
Like if I had a model for email and a model for SMS, is that what you're asking? So two models, and how do we do distinguishing? So the models work independently. You've obviously defined them in a way that says this channel has a particular score. You're actually touching on whether or not this is utopia, and it's not at this point in time, right? All this is telling us is that independently, this is how each of these are scored based on models that you've defined that say, are they responsive to call center, are they responsive to email, are they responsive to SMS? There's a step above this that analyzes amongst the competing channels, which one is the top channel on which to contact them. But that's next best action, and that's why I'm saving that for the next round. But you're absolutely right. In the same way that I have multiple propositions, a model that says whether or not they're likely to take up Android over iPhone, that's a bad example. Whether or not they're going to take up a loyalty reward over a service message about a recent complaint that they've made. They're two different propositions. Now I have to decide between these which one is the better one, right? All this has done is given me scores against each, which I can then use to rank. Now I need to, what is called, arbitrate between them. And arbitration is itself another model that simply weighs the benefits of doing one over the other. But we're touching on MBA. We will cover it in a lot more detail in part 4. So is this utopia? We started with the one prop, iPhone upgrade, active in the last 12 months, whatever. We have one customer who is now receptive across two propositions based on all our modeling and eligibility criteria. And they may be targeted on multiple channels. Exactly your question, which one do we do? Do we do both? Sometimes this is constrained by your contact rules and how much you can contact a customer. If you didn't have contact rules, could you talk to them about all these propositions at the same time? I don't know, we only have a very small attention span. I know mine's not very good. So if you're going to talk to me about iPhone upgrades, at the same time you're going to talk to me about loyalty rewards, which one am I going to action? So that's why contact rules exist, and that drives how many we're going to do at the same time. But the reality is they're eligible and receptive to both. Now the question from the business is, which one do we actually want to do? Right?
Maybe they're more responsive towards one than the other.
They could be, right? And that's what arbitration is all about. So we will cover that in our third foundation, which is optimize. It's delivering that next best action, hyper-personalization. NBA is prioritization arbitration amongst competing things, whether it's propositions or channels. It also gives us business levers that we want to permit the business to pull on these levers. What I mean by that is arbitration prioritization is one, guided by behavior, but two, driven by business rules. And if the business go, today I want to target service messages over sales messages because I think retention is more important, fine. That's a business rule that was defined, a lever that we've permitted them to configure. One day it goes, actually I need to drive more sales. I flip them around, the priorities have changed. It's now going to push more sales messages over service messages. I want the business to have those levers, the ability and freedom to control these things. So then also, like the NBA, as with everything else, the theme is that NBA itself should be flexible, extensible, modular. I should be able to add new propositions to this without having to go through a change request and a project. I should have operationally a business unit creating propositions, putting them into a pipeline, run strategies that help me arbitrate, prioritize against the business levers. But like I said, we'll cover that in part 4, which is CX Engage CX Optimize on the 22nd of August. The reason for the 2 months is it takes me forever to put these packs together. There was 100 slides I just went through and I don't know what time, about an hour and 10 minutes hopefully. That's it from a nutshell for tonight. Hopefully you found that interesting. Over to you for questions, if anyone's got any questions. Paz?
Who is running the show as far as this model is concerned in the organization? Is it a traditional marketer?
Oh, right. Oh, you mean in the organization? Yeah, no, it's not me. I mean, I've been standing up here for an hour and 10 minutes talking about it. Who else is running the show? No, sorry, Paz. Sorry, your question was in an organization, who's running this?
Because, BI would come up with this model, contextual marketing, name it whatever, engage, and then the marketer would have the traditional research-based segmentation or, with them, and then they have this clash, which to follow.
Okay.
So are you proposing a new user role in or a function?
No, I'm not actually. So the reality is, the reality is, this is an asset of the organization, incredibly valuable because not only does it attack marketing problems, it also attacks operational problems. The question is not where does it live and who's responsible for it. We can establish that once we're there. We talk to, when we engage with a business, it may be through marketing, and maybe that's where the conversation starts from. It may be from a transformation project. It may be through IT, rarely, but often this is a business-driven initiative. It doesn't matter actually where it stems from, but it does need an owner, you're right. Could it be marketing? Maybe. It is quite technical. Sometimes it could be the insights team, because the insights team are there to service the whole business and provide insight into customer behaviors. That's what this is. The outputs of it just go into marketing automation to support the marketing function. That's the flavor of what I'm presenting. But like I said, it can go back into CRM, it can go back into any system to support that function. So hopefully that answers your question. Doesn't.
People we're talking to now, they're setting up customer experience teams, and you can't do, they're pretty paralyzed unless you have something like this. So that's where it's really starting to get traction in businesses. And also the CMO, that type of role, they need to be across this to drive it, because you do need to orchestrate with so many different departments, especially in a large organization. You have to orchestrate with IT to get access to these sort of systems. You have to engage your insights and analytics people to build the models and the rest of it. So, but yeah, it's that senior exec level that really needs to drive the entire process. What's some of the biggest challenges in setting up your customer activity store, other than the source system?
I wanted one of my colleagues to come up to present exactly that. One of the sessions I wanted him to do was, because he'd gone and built it for a superannuation company, what were the biggest challenges? And I have his pack and I've got all his notes, and I'm just going to remember from the top of my head what some of the physical challenges were. But the first was obtaining, obviously, access to the activity is the obvious one. But even once you have it, timestamps between systems and correlating them is a massive problem. The level of granularity and what that activity actually represents and how they compare to one another. Like, how does a visitor website compare to doing something on an ATM? Are they comparable in any way? The granularity of what you capture. So, are you going to reproduce everything you have in digital in your activity store? No point. That's not the intent. The intent is perhaps we can condense it a bit further and say they spent 2 minutes on the home loan section of the site. That's an activity. We've taken what would be a lot of raw data in the digital space and condensed it into one activity that was relevant for what I'm trying to do. which is know what parts of the site they're on. So those were some of the challenges. I'm sure there were many others as well. Value, another one was value. What's the value of an event? Some events, like a sales transaction, has a value. It's the amount of that sales transaction. Others, like an experience and an activity that doesn't inherently have a value, what value do you give it? Do you give it something arbitrary? I wouldn't. It's a bit of a mess. It's like lead scoring. It works if you do it consistently wrong, I guess. So like these were some of the challenges that were experienced.
And some of the gaps as well. Like customers say, well, everything that happens in a store. There's not a magic framework, you know.
Yeah.
For what happened in the store, you need to capture that somehow. Whether it be a big coffee chain, you know, you have to, every time you interact with one of their stores, you need to tap on your NFC card, you know, to purchase things, or you know, you do something at the till to capture their membership.
Some of the other debt that occurs in this space is if you didn't have a complete view, like you were missing an entire source system worth of activity in this model. You've gone and done attribution and journey, and you have a black hole. You have no idea what's represented in that. Let's say I didn't get web tracking data at a known customer level. That's another one. Knowing who the activity is actually relating to. Some activity is anonymous activity when it's captured. It's not actually linked to a customer. But if you had a blank hole and you didn't see all of digital, when you go and do attribution, you're unfairly weighting what the organization did as a whole. You're not considering what digital did in that particular case. One of the things that does, though, is incentivize that business unit to participate in the model. Because you sort of go, the business has gone in this direction. We're reporting on how each of the business units contribute to outcomes, and I don't have your data. It's your business unit. Give me your data. That's one way that it sort of addresses that problem.
You know, you touched on the fact of, you know, how do you measure and give it a value? And, you know, everything is so much about experience now. The value part is quite easy. You can go and search through anything and find a value for competing products. How are your customers capturing that experience measure that is actually can be the defining part of purchasing a product or going back somewhere, going back to a coffee shop, you know, whatever but we're moving more to an omni-channel and experience rather than just based solely on value.
So again, drawing the distinction between those things that have a value will come with it. So if I'm talking about MPS is a physical thing that I've asked you to tell me on a scale of 1 to 10 how likely are you to refer our brand to a friend, that's a score that I can use, okay? Everything else that didn't come with a score, that's okay. One of the bits of analysis that we do over the top of it is assess whether or not the experience was good based on did they achieve the outcomes that they want in a period of time? Did we minimize the number of hurdles that they had to go through in order to achieve that outcome? We can start to quantify these things, put numbers against them. That can become your engagement score, the concept of a lead score. It doesn't come inherently from the value of the activity, but an interpretation of how those activities together form something. As long as you do that consistently across the whole base, you will have something useful to measure, a good experience about it. Yeah, hopefully that answers your question.
How many companies and what type of companies have these types of systems? Is it sort of early days, early adopters? Or is it, you know, if a company was to start now, are they coming late to the table?
Good question. So which organisations have this now, or who are the latecomers? Yeah. What industries? Finance and telecommunications focus on this a lot, maybe because they have a lot of money to spend and they just throw a lot of stuff at everything. But are they doing it well? No, they're huge beasts, especially the big tier ones. They have even internally lots of solutions to address the same problem, because through acquisition, you know, this company was doing it one way, this company, they never consolidated the two. That's debt that is a hurdle to overcome when trying to implement a framework like this one, because they've got many instances of it somewhere. You sort of go, I want to try and centralize it as much as possible, or find a way to sort of the hub and spoke model. I allow you to, I'll govern it, but you go and have independent instances of this same framework, but in a controlled and governed way. So the organizations that are doing this they're loaded, I'm going to say, because this is an expensive initiative. Can it be done on the cheap? Yeah, but like anything, You can do elements of this, and all you're affecting is how mature you are, right? You could be incredibly sophisticated and achieve utopia. That's going to cost you $100 million. You want something simple that gives you the benefit and the uplift in what you want to achieve, fine. For the one client that has 3,000 customers in it, literally all they're missing is industry segment and zip codes against their records. If I just bring that in, I've already achieved a lot for them. The benefits of putting a framework like this is sort of, now I've got a view of the world, like I've got a segment on which I can now, you know, produce another analysis that, and then start to dive deeper, which gives them that other value. But sometimes you can find organizations that are small, have bespoke solutions. You can find immediate value in other ways that are not necessarily a full-blown framework like this one. So just that was a long-winded response, but big organization, big tier 1s and tier 2s are the ones who can invest in this. They have the money and the capacity to do so. The smaller organizations, they will pick elements of this and implement them in a bespoke way.
And they still find the value.
And they still find value, absolutely.
Do you suggest this over implementing a CRM?
No, CRMs have a completely different function. So CRM has to be there. That's about lead management.
So link it in.
Link it in, absolutely.
Put the data through and get what you can out of it. However, they're obviously very different from what you're trying to achieve, right?
Yeah, this is an engine that is going to describe customer for a holistic view of customer. It starts probably its life as a record in a CRM system. You know, then it might make its way to a sales system, the ERP. It will make its way around the organization as they acquire products. But a lead will start its life as a record in a CRM system. So CRM systems are necessary and are an input into this framework. But this doesn't replace a CRM. This is a brains that sits alongside the CRM.
The reason I say that is for companies that don't have money for a CRM, but yet want to have a framework similar to this. Where do you find the happy medium?
They don't have money for a CRM.
No, there are. No, it depends.
Even
on your-
SaaS versions of CRM, like it's
It
the
depends on
simplest
your
thing to.
business and how much data you. It depends on your journey of how far you are and how much data you need to get into a CRM. That's what actually costs the business. So if they're behind, obviously evolution, which some businesses unfortunately are, what I'm suggesting and asking is what's the difference if you're not quite there, yet you like this framework and you want to go on that journey.
How, depending on the maturity of the business and their data, where they are in the data life cycle, how could we adapt this? I guess you sort of addressed it previously with taking elements of the framework. How
Yeah,
do
so
they adapt the framework to their business?
Yeah. I guess if they didn't have a CRM because they couldn't afford to, they're capturing leads somehow. Maybe it's in a spreadsheet. I can work with that. Anything we haven't? Like, oh, where's your data? Oh, yeah, it's in this deal sheet that I've got under my desk. I'm like, what? You're like a $10 billion enterprise. You've got a thing running under your desk. Anyway, it happens. It's there. So, look, it can work. Of course, you can make it work. It doesn't need a CRM. If it was a list that was fed in some way, maintained in some way, serving as an organization, that's what we do. We try and solve problems, and those problems come in every shape and size, you name it, and we will find a way to bring it in, you know. And obviously, these solutions have to work within the constraints of that organization: cost, budget, quality, time, cost, time, whatever. You know, you sort of go, if you didn't have the budget, this is what you're going to get. If you didn't have the time, this is what, you know. If you didn't care so much about quality, you're going to get X. So we do try and find ways to present, but at a cost. Okay, the lower, you know, you try and give me try and put this with an Excel as a front end. It's going to be a struggle, but it's possible. Any other questions? Good questions, guys. I really appreciate it. Anyone else have any questions?
I've run customer experience design kind of activities, double diamonds, to probably reach the same kind of personas, sets, at a much lower cost than, you know, implementing this system. And organizations can do that more often. So comparing to that, what additional value the system would have? The automation?
Yes, absolutely. It's the automation, and it's the fact that how do you do your persona build? What's your process for building persona? Is it analyzing data? Is it market research? It's a question back.
Yeah, interviews.
It's interviews.
Yeah.
So you sort of look at that and go, that's fine. It will give you a perspective, but how many interviews can you do in an organization that has 1 million customers? You're not going to do 1 million interviews. You're going to do something representative, or you hope it's representative enough, and then assume the rest. This doesn't need any assumption. This is already looking at every single customer and their behaviors across all the systems. I have a true holistic view that is not sampled. It's not statistical analysis trying to take 10,000 and make it look like 1 million. I'm looking at 1 million. I'm making it an automated and operational process where it's doing this analysis all the time, not just one-off. Some of those are one-off. So the reason they're investing in putting the money into this is, as opposed to just doing one-off research, is it's an asset that will continue to deliver value continuously. It's always up to date, doesn't decay over time like research. It can adapt, it's flexible, it can answer lots of questions, not just the one research question that an agency may have gone out to find an answer to. That's the value that this comes. And yes, it comes at a price, so nothing's free really. Yeah.
For all the analyzing system, all the technology, it's from my understanding, it's for the always digitalized data. But sometimes when you collect data, some when you are design for them, it's like subjectively. But what if you can collect data like in a store when all the customers enter in and exit out,
Mm-hmm.
and where do they spend their time and money, and how long, and just like those data are quite objectively.
Mm-hmm.
And is it possible for you to like design like measures to collect those original objective data instead of like questionnaire?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, good question. And we have a number of exciting projects. I'm not going to talk about them, obviously, in too much detail, but leveraging cameras, for instance, like the one in this room, to say how are people moving around a store, using passes as they walk in, using your Bluetooth on your phone to detect at least a MAC address, something that might identify you uniquely, using biometrics through cameras to detect your age band, gender, even race to some degree. That's all anonymous, but it's still, through biometrics and through analysis, gives me some insight into how customers are behaving. How much of that is relevant for targeted marketing? Not so much, because it's not something I can tie together. Through biometrics, maybe. I've got this type of demographic coming through the store at this time of day. I can define a strategy that says, when I've got tradies coming into a Caltex at 10 a.m., on my digital advertising on site, put up pies with a V or something. I don't know. Maybe that's what that demographic wants to go for, right? So that's the sort of thing we can do, absolutely. And we're doing it right now in really cool projects, by the way.
I guess it could fit in sort of engagement strategies somehow. For example, if you take Woolies, for example, I see through sensor tracking, that this particular customer is spending a lot of time in these particular aisles,
Mm-hmm.
and so I could do product retargeting.
Mm-hmm.
Personalized marketing to it.
And the reason you're capturing that in real time on the spot is because you want to do real-time personalization. Otherwise, I could have observed your, through loyalty.
In the store, I can send to your mobile campaign.
Yeah, proximity marketing and all that sort of stuff, that's there, and it's going to become more and more prominent. And it will be informed by this, because it sort of says, oh, I got Alan in the store and he tends to buy these things. But this is what he's doing now. It's no different in the digital world. In the digital world, I can inform a personalization by knowing what the customer has done historically. But I'm guided tremendously by what they're doing right now. Otherwise, why are they doing it, right? They're researching a home loan, but I've already pre-approved them for a credit card. Looking at historical data, I've pre-approved them for a $12,000 increase on their credit card. But if they're searching for a home loan right now, why on earth would I show a credit card? It doesn't make sense. This is the distinction between why we use some of these IoT devices or sensors to detect what's happening right now, is because we want to make decisions in real time to act on a behavior that we've immediately observed. We also want to be informed by, let's call it batch analysis that we've done previously, to bake some sort of preposition that we're going to go in with. It may change based on the signals that we get in real time, of course.
Okay, I think we'll
We have one more question. We actually got 2 more questions. Wow, lots of questions. Go for it.
Yeah, sorry, my question may sound a bit stupid, but I do need to ask. What if in an extreme, this is an extreme example, what if your online data sources doesn't talk with your offline data sources at all? How do you aggregate your data to identify, let's say, a bunch of unique users? You know, how to make that data talk to each other?
Can't. No, and through statistical analysis, I would say it's very difficult. If they don't, that they don't talk to each other is not so much a problem, because integration exercise will bring them together. That they don't identify a customer at a level that is comparable, that's a bit more of a challenge. You sort of go, I've got an anonymous session in my digital world, what they're doing online right now. If I have nothing to say who it is in any shape or form, I can't tie it back to customer. In digital tracking solutions that even Servin have developed, we implemented methods where we try to capture whatever we can. If someone goes into a form and doesn't even submit it, but puts in an email address or a mobile number or you know, whatever, some bit of information that we might be able to use, I'm going to immediately capture it against the session profile. That might, through matching, allow me to tie it back to an individual. Or alternatively, in a more sophisticated approach, is I've captured their login, let's say in e-commerce when they log in, that you'll have to enter in a client number, an email address, a password, whatever. I'll capture that identifier. Now I have something concrete to marry that session to the data that I have. If I don't have that, I can't do it. Simple as that. And there was one question at the front.
How do you define accuracy of this model? If you run a campaign and you got the targeted audience for it, it's successful, everything is done, and do you have any kind of feedback system that you can use to retrain that model?
Good question. So the retraining of a model doesn't change in this whole framework. It's the same discipline as you would if you had to retrain any other model. Do we have access to the data that tells us how well a model is performing? Sure, because what we have here, if you recall that entire loop of it going to MA and then MA even feeding back, is to say, from a marketing perspective, I've targeted them with a specific offer. They were in this segment, they were in this cell, they got this treatment. Did they respond? Did they convert? Because now I have conversion metrics against them. To define all the metrics I needed to say this was successful or was not successful. That's it. That's all I need really to justify whether or not the campaign was successful. The model itself is just its predictive capabilities, is a sort of byproduct of did the campaign succeed, and hence the model was good at predicting.
You should separate out the performance of the campaign versus the performance of the model.
Yeah.
Because we've seen many cases where they're like, oh, you know, we've got a churn model, for example, and they run a campaign, but they didn't save anyone leaving. And they go, oh, well, the model's rubbish. No, the model predicted 90% of people who did actually leave. The campaign just didn't have any effect on that. So it's always judging the model for what it was purposed for, as opposed to, you know, the campaign that utilised that model.
Yeah, and that came up recently in a piece I did, and they were like, yeah, it's going to produce an uplift in it. It's like, well, hold on. It's going to inform the campaign. If you run a crap campaign over my data, I'm not going to get that uplift. So I'm not going to word it that way when I'm putting it forward. You understand that, right? So yeah, we'll get a tissue in a sec. Cool. Any other questions? Otherwise, the guys at the back already started eating. Okay. If you want to give feedback, come and see me. You send me an email. Yes, go. Yeah, what did I say at the beginning? I might share elements of the slides with this audience. So if you want some parts of it, let me know, have a conversation. So here, that's why I have this one here. Come see me, there's my email, there's my mobile number, give me a call, and I may share parts of it, yes.
Well, thank you very much, Alan.
Oh, thanks everyone, appreciate it.